All right, well, let's get started. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sam Stevenson, CEO of the Guelph Greens Federal Side. I want to welcome all of you to tonight's event, What's Next? A Conversation on a Caring and Just Recovery. That question of what's next is one that I'm sure all of us are asking as we journey through this pandemic. And that will be the overall question for our panelists tonight. We'll be hearing their take on this past year and what actions are needed to ensure a caring and just recovery. Before I introduce our panelists, I'll take a moment to express gratitude for the land that I am on here in Guelph. I don't know about you, but the outdoors has been just a vital source of well-being during these times. For my family, it's been a good time of outdoor hikes, tobogganing with the kids, and even seeing the other day an opossum moseying around in our backyard. I want to acknowledge that the land that I'm on is part of the Between the Lakes Treaty number 3, and it was signed between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit Nation in 1792. And it agreed to allow Indigenous and settler peoples to coexist in the area forever. And being part of that treaty, I do want to learn more about how I can support Indigenous reconciliation in my own life. Just a couple logistics for tonight to keep things on time and the audio clear. You are muted, but you are welcome to ask questions. And you can do that by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We might get to asking one of your questions to our panelists this evening, but if we don't, know that we're going to post answers on our social media afterwards. All right, let me introduce our panelists. So first is Annamie Paul, leader of the Green Party of Canada and a Canadian politician, activist, and lawyer. Dr. Dianne Saxe, a top Canadian and international environment and climate lawyer and deputy leader of the Green Party of Ontario. Graeme Reed, a doctoral candidate at the University of Guelph, studying Indigenous governance, environmental governance, and the climate crisis, as well as a senior policy advisor for the Assembly of First Nations. And finally, our moderator for tonight, Mike Schreiner, leader of the Green Party of Ontario and MPP for Guelph. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks for the great introduction of everyone. And we have a stellar panel tonight. I'm incredibly excited. These are 3 vital voices that all Ontarians and all Canadians need to hear from. So it's an honor to have you join us, and it's an honor for all of you to join us tonight. So I'm going to direct the first question to Dianne Saxe. So Dianne, I think COVID's exposed how fragile, like almost all aspects of our life is right now. And we know how much fragility there is in our ecosystems because of the climate crisis that we're confronting. And I'm just wondering what you think the connections are that you've learned around climate and COVID, and how can we, I guess, learn from this moment in time that we're in as we think about addressing the climate crisis.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Sam. Hello, everybody. I agree with you that the COVID pandemic has helped drive home to me and many people how fragile our way of life is. We tend to assume that when things are good, they're always going to be good, because after all, we like it this way and we want it to be this way. But the underpinnings that we stand on are not that strong. So I have a couple of slides I use to show people that yes, physics, like viruses, doesn't compromise with us. It doesn't care what we want or what's convenient. It has its own rules. And those rules include, among other things, exponential change. Exponential change is really hard for people to understand. We saw that early on, if you think back a year ago to March, when the pandemic was already starting to explode, but people hadn't seen it yet and were shocked that levels went from low to high. You know, there's that old joke, if you imagine a big football stadium that's going to be filled with water in 44 minutes. Well, at 42 minutes, it still looks mostly empty because of the power of compounding, the power of exponential growth. So I hope that we can learn from this pandemic to be much more appreciative and respectful of our dependence on the natural world. We know that human destruction of ecosystems makes pandemics more likely. We know that human damage to ecosystems makes them more likely to collapse, and the climate crisis is going to put bigger and bigger hammer blows on those ecosystems that we weakened at the same time. So if we want to have a healthy, happy, prosperous future, we've got to look after the natural systems on which our lives depend. It's not too late quite yet, but there's not much time left.
I love the football stadium analogy, because so many times people use a frog in a boiling pot of water, and especially the day after the Super Bowl. I think the football analogy is a little nicer and maybe reflects the day we're in, because I always think of the poor frog, but it does highlight what is bearing down on us and how we sometimes don't think about it until those final crucial minutes. Graeme, I think in many respects for me, the pandemic has shown how out of balance we are in many aspects of our society, with nature, with each other. And I know First Nations and Indigenous people have talked a lot about the structural inequities in our society and just the role in which colonization has played in that. And so I'm just wondering if you have some thoughts on how we can bring balance into our lives with each other and with the earth.
Yeah, Miigwech, Mike, and I guess Anin Bojo, Graeme Reed, Nijikaz, Anishinaabe, and Dow. It's really good to see all of your faces, and I'm really happy that we have such a kind of wide virtual circle in joining us. And so I want to acknowledge all of you, the land that you're on, and also the land that I'm on. Also want to acknowledge that it's Black History Month, and the importance of understanding truth before we kind of map our future collectively. And so I think your question and Dianne's point was really important in kind of acknowledging the reality that crises, and whether health, which we're all very seized with currently, or climate, which isn't coming for certain regions but has been quite evident in the north, is something that folks, Indigenous folks and other structurally oppressed groups have been talking about for a while, in the sense that it just highlights and unearths these kind of structural inequities and these kind of compounding impacts that these things have from what I would consider kind of a root cause analysis. And often when we talk about climate, or we talk about dealing with environmental restoration, we don't really talk about what are the root causes driving those problems. And so to get back to that point of balance, I first think we need to acknowledge what's causing the imbalance. And there are a few things that I think kind of generate that, and I think you've touched on the point of colonization and the kind of ongoing impacts of what colonization has brought to Indigenous peoples and other structurally oppressed groups that were here before what we currently call as Canada came about. And so obviously an important element. I also think it's important to kind of recognize our economic system is a root cause, and Dianne kind of raised some of the kind of extractive tendencies that the system in which is generated, whether it's extracting the land, extracting people through their labor, extraction of our women, all of which I think are kind of important things to rectify. And then I guess the final piece that I see as kind of a root cause is really understanding this disconnection that Dianne spoke about, and the tendency, in lieu of addressing that disconnection, in lieu of going outside and kind of acknowledging the relationship that we have with the natural world, our world, right? I'm struck by I was up in the Yukon, I guess, I don't know what time is these days, but a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, whenever it was. And one of the key messages was that, given that the land and the people are the same, we need healthy people to have a healthy land, and we need healthy land to have a healthy people. And only when we address, those kind of intergenerational trauma associated with those root problems can we really get to that space where we are seeking that rebalance. And there are a variety of different pieces that I can pick up on with respect to that. But I think the final reflection that I have about that is that the land is apolitical. And I think part of, and I hope Annamie has been a strong advocate for this. Talking about where we are politically is equally important in how we facilitate that kind of rebuilding of relationships. And whether your political affiliation or whether you're First Nations or not First Nations, the land really doesn't matter. It doesn't care. And now's the opportunity to get to that space where we kind of acknowledge our collective future that all of us need to move towards, while also addressing the kind of inequitable starting point that many of us are facing. So I'm going to stop there. Miigwech, Mike, and happy for this conversation.
Miigwech, Graeme, and I loved your comment that the land is apolitical. It really, I think, speaks to me and just the importance of reconnecting people to land. And I think one of the things that's been really hard for me over the last year has been hard for everyone in so many respects. But the last few months, while we've all been dealing with this crisis, to see the provincial government in Ontario attack the land in the way that it has through dismantling the environmental assessment process, conservation authorities, the highway proposals, it's been relentless, and at a time when we're all facing like a human health crisis. And so I appreciate you reminding us that the land is apolitical, and how do we reconnect with the land and how important that is to healing, I think. So thank you. Annamie, you are the newest, and I would argue strongest voice on the Canadian political scene. And I think a voice that we desperately need in Ottawa right now. And I can't think of a sector of our society where inequities and the humanitarian crisis has been most exposed as it has been in our long-term care homes, and just the way in which we care for our elders in general. And I would argue you've been the strongest voice in Canada on the crisis that's happening in our long-term care homes. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about why you're so passionate about that issue, and why addressing the inequities that our elders have faced, that have been exposed in this crisis, is so important as we think about rebuilding and recovering from COVID.
Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you very much for having me here. I'm coming to you from the traditional territories of the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee, which I say with a great deal of gratitude for many of the reasons that Graeme already mentioned. This is something that needs to concern us all, because we have everything that it takes in this country to be able to guarantee that everyone can live in dignity from their very first day to their very last day. And so to see that that promise not fulfilled, and to see it unfulfilled with deadly effect in the case of long-term care is something that has to shock the conscience. I think that we are going to be grappling and having to reconcile ourselves for a very long time to what we have done and not done during this pandemic to protect the most vulnerable people in our society. And that is really most on display, I would say. Well, okay, let's not talk in terms of rankings, but let's just say this is one of the areas where it is most on display. Canada has the worst record for protecting long-term care residents. And these are not just, of course, seniors, but these are also people who need to live in an assisted living environment. The absolute worst, the worst of all the wealthy countries, of all the OECD countries, by a very large margin. It is not, I don't use words like humanitarian crisis lightly, but really that's what this is. This really fits the classic definition of a humanitarian crisis, where you have an identifiable group whose health and security is at risk due to an event. It is also not easy for me to say, but I think it is a reasonable description to call this a genocide. This is because this is an avoidable situation, which has led to the death of thousands and thousands of people in Canada, and it's something that will lead to many, many more before this is over because of what we haven't done. And so I think that these are the moments when those of us who can speak out should speak out. I've already had, even today, I would say once a week, I have someone say to me, "Enough already," enough already. It is not enough. It is not enough until we do what can be done, and we know what needs to be done. So, as we first, I would say I want to be able to live with myself. I mean, I have my own personal story of losing a loved one during this pandemic in long-term care. But even beyond that, I want to know that once we look back at this moment in time and ask ourselves what we did and did not do, that I can feel comfortable with my efforts. And also, I want Canada to be all it can be, to really fulfill its promise. And that really requires us to make sure that at times like this, we're protecting those who are most in need of protection. So, there's a lot of consensus amongst the experts about this. We need to just make sure that there is, until people can get vaccinated, we need to make sure there's rapid testing. We need to make sure that we're paying the workers in long-term care facilities a living wage. We need to make sure that there's personal protective equipment. These are all quite basic things, 4 hours of care per day per resident. They're all basic things. And I would say that I'm hoping that people in Canada, whether you have someone you care about in long-term care, or whether you imagine that you might be in long-term care one day, or just because you're a decent human being, that you insist that those who have everything that it takes to change the situation between today and tomorrow, that they do what they can do. So I'm really encouraged by the way Canadians have stepped up for each other during this pandemic. I think it is incredibly encouraging and inspirational the way that even now, even after all this time, people in Canada are saying, we want to be there for each other. We're willing to sacrifice for each other. I would love to see their courage reflected in our political leadership. Those who hold the levers of power, not you, Mike, or you, Dianne. Those who at this moment are the government at the different levels of government. I would love to see them reflecting the same courage and sense of responsibility to community that we see people all across the country reflecting every day.
Well, I know, Annamie, you have that courage, and you've had it on display really since you first announced. Well, I would argue back when you were a candidate in the last federal election. I first met Annamie. We were at a climate march together, and she had this huge sign that was like, "This is the candidate."
Yeah.
And I thought, like, how many politicians say, "Hey, I am here to talk with you," and have that courage? And I think you're right. Like, Canada is not going to be all we can be if we don't step up and protect the most vulnerable. And
Can I tell the anecdote
yeah.
there, Mike?
Go ahead.
you were just this streak out of the side of my peripheral vision. I said, who is this gentleman? First of all, running up on this, I think it was almost 30 degrees that day, heat, in a jacket. You know, you're wearing a jacket and a unbuttoned shirt. There was no tie, so that streaking up, and it was you, and it was so nice. You know, you just said, Annamie, congratulations. I could see you're really working hard. You know what? I really needed that boost because yes, I was carrying a harness sign on my back for hours that day. So I can source you one if you want.
I would love to have one. I would love to have one. And just so everyone knows, it was right outside of Queen's Park. So I was doing media. So I don't normally go to climate marches wearing a suit jacket. Just
you looked good.
So, you know, actually, Dianne, that day makes me think of the question I want to ask you, because I think one of the things that was remarkable about that particular climate march, and I'd say all the climate marches that I've been a part of, is just the diversity of the crowd, the passion, the connections of different people in our society coming together and talking about wanting to save this place we call home, and this place that I think we all love and that we all want to spend time together in. And I know that you've talked a lot, Dianne, about how do we connect diverse parts of our society together to build a better future. And I'm just wondering if I guess maybe coming out of COVID, how important you think those connections are to recovery and what the future could look like.
I think those connections are critical to our recovery. Catherine Wilkinson had a good take on it, a twist on the list I've been using. So what are the three things that science has told us we urgently need the most? Well, one is to reduce our carbon pollution, which is mostly about reducing fossil fuels. The second is to protect nature, so particularly the sinks where carbon can go. And the third is to rebuild community. And why is that the third on the climate list? Well, there's a lot of different reasons. One is that we are much less likely to be able to withstand the hammer blows that the climate and environmental crises are bringing us if we are divided, if we have massive inequality, if many people feel exploited and forgotten and ignored, and others are just retreating behind their gates. Second thing is that the kind of changes we need to do to be able to have good lives with much lower carbon footprints, a lot of those changes are changes that require us to come together in new ways. Spend more time, as Sam mentioned, outside where we live and share that with other people. Being able to meet our needs, get what we need by walking and cycling and transit without having to drive somewhere means a denser, more diverse community. Can also mean cleaner air, which is better for everybody, but especially those who have suffered the most. And so we're more likely to be able to make the changes we need to make to reduce the climate onslaught if we can pull together as a community. We are more likely to be able to withstand the hammer blows of climate if we can pull together as a community. And the kind of transformations that we need to make for both of those will be easier to do if we can do it as a coherent community, and will help us rebuild coherent community. So I'm spending a lot of time thinking about this. I'm having, as you know, I'm hosting a conversation next week about Black voices in climate action, and how would climate policies be different if we had more Black voices at the table. Doing one later about Indigenous voices. Somehow we have to solve multiple problems at once. That's in some ways really hard to do, harder than solving one at a time, but it's become pretty clear that we can no longer do just one thing at a time. We're going to have to choose solutions that make multiple things better at once. Can we do it? Probably. And anyway, the alternative is really bad. So I guess the answer is going to be yes.
Yeah, no, that I almost hesitate to bring this up, but as you were saying that, I was thinking of January 6th and the insurrection that happened in Washington, D.C. And I thought, that's one path we can choose to walk down in a crisis, or we can choose the path that you outlined, Dianne, where we actually come together as a community and we solve the crisis together. And I know which one I would choose. And I think I know which one I believe most Canadians would choose, but we do have those elements here. And so building community is our way to build resiliency against that sense of division. Graeme, you had talked about, I want to build on this sense of connection, if you don't mind. And you had talked about just the interconnection between people and planet, the places where we live, nature, etc. And I'm just wondering, what connections do you think we need to mobilize to, one, help us get through the remainder of this pandemic, but also to build back from the pandemic and address things like the climate and ecological crisis, but also inequities and colonization?
Yeah, appreciate the question. I guess my initial response is that we tend to kind of dichotomize these things, which is to say, we're going to recover from the pandemic and then we're going to think about addressing the subsequent crisis. And I feel like maybe part of the approach, and Dianne kind of alluded to this, is starting to see those as the same. And I think like one of the things that, we're doing in our work is starting to really avoid the tendency to kind of put climate and kind of environmental issues as something separate from our everyday lives and experiences. And it kind of speaks to that notion of like compounding and intersecting crises. And so only when we address, the inability for folks to access nature because of X, Y, and Z, can we then get them to a place where they can build those relationships with nature? And, this manifests in a wide variety of different instances, whether in urban centers or whether, just having money for gas to go hunting in your ancestral territory. Like all of this is kind of privileged participation within the economies that we're generating. And so I guess, the first way that I see, finding kind of common ground is finding kind of a common problem, and like avoiding the tendency to, overly articulate problems as, really symptoms of those root causes that I had identified. And I'm struck by Annamie's points and also Dianne's. It's, we tend to operate in this environment of scarcity, which is to say, either you do one thing or you have to do the other. And I feel like one of the lessons that I take away from the, at least the last 12 months is, when there's political will for the mobilization of hundreds of billions of dollars, it goes by pretty quick. And so I see that notion of courage that Annamie is kind of raising as, an important step for how do we address the kind of systemic problems that we know exist, right? Like it, I don't think the long-term care humanitarian crisis is anything that folks were surprised. We know what the answers are. We know what the dollar amounts are required to address them. We're just not doing it. And I, something that I'm struggling with lately is that question of why. And I find Dianne's points are a very similar circumstance. We know what we need to do to address runaway climate change. We need to stop oil and gas development just because of the, kind of trajectory that we're on. And, it's ironic that, on one hand, we're articulating a net zero future. And I think, and I commend kind of the federal government for doing that. On the other hand, we're projecting a 48% growth in oil and gas by 2050, which just seems to me that there's kind of incongruence in the approach and the willingness to address these kind of really systemic issues. And until we start to rely on, really kind of, I guess, perception change and kind of solution change, which is to say, maybe technology, maybe market-based mechanisms are not the best tool to address what's foundationally about relationships and the kind of, it's one of the points that keeps running back in my mind is a story that was shared by Robin Wall Kimmerer, who you may or may not know. She wrote the book Braiding Sweetgrass, which is, been around for a little while now, but yeah, a really good book about how do you weave, Indigenous science and Western science to help kind of address common futures. And she recently released just this article called I think it was the serviceberry economy. And in one of, among other anecdotes, she was talking about the gift economy and how do we move away from, this tendency to aspire to accumulate and this tendency to compete and create kind of this scarcity environment where we know that there is sufficient abundance across the world to address all of the problems that we've identified. It's just that we've created this mindset to, hoard wealth and hoard resources and hoard, the labor of people, right? And I think now is an opportunity to really, based on the lessons, kind of rewire our brains to get to that space where, we're able to address these kind of foundational issues. And I just want to make one point, and I know I'm going on, sorry, it's just like an interesting issue. Part of what I see as kind of the way forward to partnership and to collaboration is acknowledging the imbalance in partnership. And I mentioned just the importance of addressing truth before reconciliation, because we're still in the truth phase as kind of Canadians writ large, and we're still understanding, how colonization and how kind of violent oppression manifests in the design of our, policies and our federal regulations and our legislation. And so, really we need to kind of embark on that truth-telling journey and then get to the space where we can start to envision what I see as this, just, equitable, and resilient future for our little ones. And, I see the building back better rhetoric as slightly harmful to that, because it's that notion and it assumes that we're all starting at the same point, when in actuality, we're really addressing those kind of ongoing structural marginalization for, Indigenous peoples, Black or other racialized communities, all of which need to need appropriate action to address those kind of systemic inequities. I'm sorry, that one was long-winded.
Oh, it was worth it. And you must have connected with my dog, because I don't know if it was picked up on the mic, but I had to mute there for a second because my dog got very excited when you were talking, Graeme. And I think the point you just made, that when we quote build back, and however we do that, that not everyone is starting from the same starting point. And I think that is so vital to think about. And I actually think in some ways the pandemic has even made those starting positions further apart in the wrong direction. And that's going to have to be addressed. Annamie, one of the ways, if we're going to deal with the climate crisis, we're going to have to connect with the people who, quote, are going to be the losers from the transition that needs to happen. And there's a lot of talk about what a just transition would look like, but you have both eloquently talked about it on a policy level and a vision level, but also on a personal level, because as you've reminded people, your brother has worked in the oil patch. And I just want to give you an opportunity to talk about, like, what is your vision for a just transition, and how do we deal with the issue that Graeme just raised, that we're not all starting from the same starting line, and how do we address that moving forward?
Well, that is really the big thing, how we address that going forward. Are we going to seize this opportunity? And that is how I see it. I see this as the only fitting tribute for all that has been lost, all that has been sacrificed during this period, that we convert all of that tragedy into an opportunity to right the wrongs, the things that we could have done a long time ago and neglected to do, and put us in this, the situation that we're in, and left so many people at so much risk. And so we talk already about the possibility, the sheer joy of completing our social safety net, of taking all of the just the goodwill that we see still exists between people in this country, and using that to finally ensure that there is, as I said, a dignified life possible from the very beginning to the very end. So that is, and it covers all of the areas, and we can be ambitious enough to cover all of the areas. We don't need to pick and choose, well, maybe it's pharmacare or maybe it's dental care. No, first of all, we have learned, I hope, once and for all, that everything is interconnected. And that if you're, it's like the little boy in the dam, that Dutch story, and you plug your hole there, and there's another one that comes up there. You have to try to fill them all at once. And I'm hoping that we understand, we've taken that lesson. And so when we talk about what comes next, that's a very big part of it. And when I think about people like my brother, they're definitely at the heart of it, and as they should be. No one has to be left behind, and I think it's just so unfair. It's very cruel, this false choice that is being made between economic prosperity and jobs for workers in those sectors, and the green recovery, and tackling the climate emergency. That really is a false choice, and I'm trying to use more and more. I hope I don't wear it out before the next election, but everyone was wondering why I gifted Erin O'Toole a book on the collapse of the cod fisheries for the holidays. And I think it was the Hill Times or Politico or whatnot. It was I think it was maybe a bit cerebral for people. But it just struck me, having read that story and trying to read about our history, that this is what happens. This is what happens when we wait too long. This is what happens when we push our natural world too far. This is what happens when we're not able to separate the people from the powerful interests that are willing to go until they've extracted the very last dollar and then pick up sticks and head out of town. And so I don't want to see that happening out in on the prairies or in Newfoundland. And we have the opportunity to make sure that it doesn't happen. So, we're going to be talking a lot about how those places should be front and center when we're talking about, let's say, taking our economy out of its current moribund state. The money that we're investing should be going into areas where they are going to help us, on the one hand, complete the social safety net, and on the other, build a green economy that recognizes the finite resources of our planet. That builds all the infrastructure that we need, that invests in the sectors that have a future. And those workers, we know for a fact that those jobs pay more, they're more stable, they're safer. Anyone who has anyone that they know who has worked out in the oil patch will tell you that that is incredibly dangerous work. It is very dirty work. It's work where you're just doused in chemicals all day long while you're doing your work. You're far away from your family most of the time for very long periods of time. If we can offer an alternative, I know that the workers will take it, because it's not a sexy lifestyle. There's some problems there. So this is what we're talking about. We want people to feel joyful and a sense of possibility about the future that we can build. I want them to feel like we can take these lessons that we've learned and say we've learned them for good this time. And doing just enough is not good enough. We can be so ambitious and know that we can do it. And that is, I'm hoping that we're all going to be talking about that, Mike, at every level. I would say it's what gives me optimism and hope at this moment, that we might be able to persuade enough people to vote for people like you, people like Dianne, who really believe in that kind of future for their communities.
You know, I think the point you made about being joyful is so important, because sometimes like it can almost feel overwhelming. And I have moments like that. I almost hate, you know, politicians aren't supposed to make themselves vulnerable, but there are times when you walk into the legislature and the problems seem so big, and you can really get down if you don't bring that joy to the work. And it's one of the things that really keeps me going. And so I just, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And I think for all of us, I think, you know, there's this issue around activist burnout, and just how important it is to avoid that. I know Chidi's going to come in a second to bring in audience questions, but I just wanted to, when I got distracted by my dog, I was going to mention one thing about the service-berry economy that Graeme had brought up, was that I was meeting with a very senior business leader in Ontario recently, who actually talked to me about one of the lessons he'd learned in this pandemic was the need to start rethinking about things like barter economies and things like that. And I was thinking, my goodness, if one of the leading like business leaders in our province is talking about essentially gift economy, there's some hope for the future there. So before Chidi comes in, Annamie, I want to ask you one more question.
Sure.
And Dianne had talked about those community connections and building those diverse coalitions as we think about addressing, you know, I would argue the public health crisis we're facing, the economic crisis we're facing, and then obviously the climate emergency. And I think you have particular insight in how we build diverse political coalitions. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity to reflect on that a bit.
Yep. You know, we've been thinking about that a lot, in particular over the last little while, because we just launched our Time to Run recruitment drive. We're trying to, we're really inviting people in their own communities to tell us about the leaders, the people who are just quietly getting all the work done that they might like to see put their names forward to be nominated, well, to, you know, compete for a nomination and then run to be their MP, because we know that it's time for a new generation of leadership. I really don't believe that we are going to get to where we want to go, and not just us. I don't just mean Greens. You know, we hear poll after poll and focus group after focus group, even in the midst of the pandemic. People have said very clearly, we do not want to go back to the way things were. We understand that it's just simply not good enough. We're ready for something different, which is very interesting, because usually, not to be too wonkish about it, we know that people are usually quite risk averse, particularly at moments of crisis. You know, they normally crave stability, and they're quite nostalgic. So to hear that is extraordinary. And so if we're going to do that, we need new voices who are in the room as we're crafting this better future together. We know that it creates better public policy when we have diversity. We know that it just changes the dynamics of institutions in terms of the level of cooperation, collaboration, all the kind of things that we're going to need if we're going to do that work and fulfill the potential. So so yes, you know, we started that on Friday, and we have gone through an entire review and revamp of all of our processes and structures to make sure that we aren't creating any unintended barriers. That's sort of a passion project of mine over the last number of months, along with other members. And so we're doing the work internally. That's where it starts, so that we really can be reflecting the value of respect for diversity externally as well. And then part of it, you know, is just really, it's just attitudinal. It's just being willing sometimes to step back to and make space for the leadership that already exists to feel welcome. And that is an ongoing thing, and we really need that, because if we're talking about the climate crisis, or if we're talking about our social safety net, this is something where we need allyships in the most unusual places. And so it's something that that we need to focus on as a party. It's something that we're focusing on very much. And I'm really encouraged by what I see, because what we have to offer is something that really speaks to the needs of this moment. It really proposes the building blocks for really just an equitable society. So we should be the most diverse movement in Canadian politics, and that's really the humble ambition. We'll see. I mean, Michael, I will tell the people listening, and you're the first to hear this, is, we launched this campaign on Friday. Was it Friday? No, Thursday late evening. So it's been on for 3 days now. And just in that period of time, we had, I guess we've had about 300 people either nominate themselves or write in to nominate someone that they want to see. Responding to our call for a new, more diverse parliament that reflects the people, who it represents. And so that is extraordinary. I think it's more than that now, but that was the latest count. So there's people are ready if we extend our hands just a little bit to them. And so I'm really excited to be doing that work with you.
That is inspiring. Wow. That's amazing. Congratulations. Yeah, that is awesome. Yeah, no, I'm pumped up now.
Yeah, let's go.
Absolutely. I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight now. I'm going to be thinking about how do we build on this?
Let's talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So Chidi, you're coming on with audience questions. So I'm going to turn it over to you and have at it.
Yes, thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate it. My name is Chidi. I'm the social justice coordinator for the Guelph Green here. And this discussion has been great, and we'll have a lot of questions pumping in from all our social media platform, but we will not be able to get to all the questions. So question number one will go to you, Mike. Speaking of fraud, government, the treatment of the land, what action can we really take to motivate fraud to end the environmental destruction agenda?
Yeah, so I think one of the things we can do is mobilize a diverse coalition to push back on some of the most destructive things. So I was actually just meeting with Scugog First Nation today, who is the Mississauga the Credit First Nation nearest Duffins Creek, which is the big 57-acre wetland in Pickering Ajax that they're going to destroy, and just talking about how we can work together along with environmental groups and others to try to halt the destruction of the last remaining provincially significant wetland in the Eastern GTA. Or I think of how communities came together, farmers, environmentalists, citizens groups, to push back on the Ford government's opening the Greenbelt for development a couple of years ago. Was one of the few things that they actually pulled back on and took out of legislation. And so I think if we can come together as people with people power, we can push back against some of the actions of the Ford government's taking.
Thank you very much, Mike. The second question goes to Graeme. Why are there still water issues among some Indigenous community? Graeme?
Some of the major issues, Chidi?
Yes, the water issues among some Indigenous communities.
Yeah. I mean, drinking water on reserve remains a pretty significant issue, and I think it kind of is another one of those crises that we know the problem, know the solution, but won't mobilize the appropriate funds to do it. And so, I think kind of there are legislative challenges, and I think in the chat, Dawn asked about just what you can do federally and provincially. I think federally, there are acts such as the Safe Drinking Water Act for First Nations that has been quite contentious and is supposed to be dismantled by just kind of over time part of a liberal commitment. But I guess what we need is the resources to invest in community-led solutions that also addresses the kind of chronic underfunding of infrastructure on reserve, and the acknowledgement of, where the Indian Act created reserves, right? This is part of our history. We're in the most ecologically sensitive areas. So it kind of makes sense that there's an enhanced vulnerability because of that history. And so not only do we have to address the underfunding, but we also need to address the kind of enhanced sensitivity because of, where those lands were identified by the federal government and the design of the Indian Act.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it. The last question goes to Annamie. Will the federal Greens have the courage to propose a Green New Deal?
We would propose a Green New Deal if it wasn't so modest. If it was as ambitious as what we were proposing, we'd be all for it, but it doesn't go far enough. And I will maybe use that question as an opportunity to remind people, hopefully not too much. My mom was a school teacher, so hopefully I don't sound too much like a school teacher when I say it. But, our policies in Canada, our social policies in Canada are far more advanced in most areas when compared to the United States. Let's keep in mind that you still have people like Bernie Sanders and AOC that are being called radicals for proposing Medicare. I would just say, let's not pin ourselves to that particular baseline because it's not nearly ambitious enough. So the Green New Deal means different things to different people, but let's say even at its most ambitious, we go further. In terms of the greenhouse gas emissions reductions that we're talking about, the speed of those reductions, in terms of the let's say the social policy elements as well, be it universal programs or all the things that we've covered tonight. Be it when we talk about a just transition. I mean, we really, when we in 2019 looked at what was most commonly known as the Green New Deal and compared it to our plan was much further along the road. I will say I'm really encouraged to see the action and hear the indications coming out of the United States. If we can have a true partner in North America on the climate, even on part of our ambitions for the climate, it would make such a difference. And certainly having a president that is talking really clearly about the need to be ambitious about the climate emergency as a national security risk, placing an advisor right at the heart of his inner cabinet. Those and the things that he did on day one, those force us to act here. And I wish it didn't come to that, but having that pressure from the US is something that is going to make a difference here. So if they would just stop the fracking and the incursions on Indigenous lands, you might have a total winner, but at least we're getting somewhere with them. So I mean, yes to the Green New Deal for them. They're not as far along as Canada is. They'll catch up with us someday in terms of the Green Party's ambition, and we welcome them to join us in that ambition.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'll pass it on now to Krista.
Hi, thank you very much, Chidi. My name is Krista Renner. I'm the president of the CA, or the provincial side of the Guelph Greens. And I just have to say, there's something that Annamie said that just kind of stopped me in my tracks. And that is that we have everything we need in this country for people to live with dignity. We live in Canada. We live in Ontario. And we have everything we need for all people to have some level of dignity. And what we need is some of that exponential change that Dianne was talking about. We need exponential change in leadership, representation, diversity. We need people speaking for the land because, as Graeme said, the land does not care. It is apolitical. So in closing, I would just like to say thank you to each of our speakers. Thank you, Mike, for leading us in such a great discussion. I still see 18 questions waiting to be answered, and we're going to answer those and put them on Facebook. So I want to say thank you to everybody. I know Zoom calls are invading our lives, but you sat down with us tonight and you took the time to listen to what this could look like and what we need to all do to make this look different. And starting at a baseline that starts with structurally marginalized people, not with what's comfortable for the majority. And so I would just like to say thank you to our speakers. I would like to say thank you to the organizers of this event. And I would like to say thank you to the audience who's watching. We will be sending out a survey so that we have a sense for what you'd like to see in the future. And we will answer your questions. Please go to Facebook, look to the Guelph Greens Facebook page, and we'll try and get the answers in there in the next day or two. Thank you, and have a great night.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Be well and be safe, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Mike.
you so much.
Bye, Dianne, Krista.
Bye.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Everyone,
night.
thank you.
Thanks. Our stellar